Tonight on The Late Debate, we're joined by the former government minister, who's now one of Theresa May's fiercest backbench critics.
Forcing the PM's deal through when it is so universally unpopular will do nothing to heal the divisions in our country.
And with MPs deciding the fate of Mrs May's plan, we take the capital's political pulse after a dramatic week at Westminster.
Theresa May's deal has emerged as a Frankenstein's monster, an ugly beast that no one voted for or wanted.
But first, the former Education Secretary, Justine Greening, hasn't been far from the limelight since she was sacked by the Prime Minister in a reshuffle earlier this year. When Justine Greening won Putney from Labour in 2005, she was given the star treatment, invited to appear in a photo call with the Tory leader. Not that Michael Howard was hanging around.
I believe it's better for me to stand aside sooner rather than later so that the party can choose someone who can.
That someone was David Cameron, a fully signed-up member of the Justine Greening fan club.
And it's great to be introduced by Justine Greening, who is a hard-working MP, who is a conviction MP, who is a campaigning MP, who is a great woman MP.
In 2011, Cameron promoted her to the Cabinet, making her Secretary of State for Transport, despite her opposition to a third runway at Heathrow. Another thorny issue in her inbox was High Speed 2. It was Greening's job to sell the project to unhappy Tory voters in West London and the Chilterns.
More than half of this route will either be in tunnel or cutting.
Greening was there at the start of Crossrail in 2012, unveiling the tunnel boring machines with the Mayor, Boris Johnson, before moving to a new post at International Development.
Justine Greening.
In the 2017 general election, her safe seat of Putney was turned into a marginal, as her majority went from more than 10,000 to 1,500.
I got involved not because I had a big life mission to become an MP, but because I wanted to make a difference.
Last summer, she was one of the VIPs at the head of London's annual Pride March in her role as Equalities Minister. A year earlier, the day after the referendum result, she announced she was in a same-sex relationship in a tweet saying, "I campaigned for a stronger in, but sometimes you're better off out." Theresa May made her Education Secretary, but when the Prime Minister attempted to reshuffle her to another department earlier this year, Greening quit.
I did what I thought the right thing to do was. Thank you.
When it comes to Brexit, Greening is one of May's backbench rebels.
We will have tied the hands of future generations to be bound by rules that they will have had no chance to write.
She's not just opposed to May's Brexit deal, she firmly backs a second referendum. I'm joined now by the Putney MP, Justine Greening. Welcome, Justine. First of all, before we talk about your campaigns, let's talk about this extraordinary week in Westminster. Are we any closer to a second referendum?
I think the chances of a second referendum have risen because it's become more clear that Parliament really is in gridlock. I think this has been something that's been obvious since before the summer, but I do think as we approach the moment on Tuesday, it's really clear that the Prime Minister's deal isn't going to get through, but I think it's equally clear that no other way forward on Brexit, whether it's a no-deal approach or whether it's this now muted Norway approach, I don't think that either of those will get supported either.
What do you say to those voters who would feel betrayed by a second referendum? And there are many of them.
I totally understand that, and actually I think the problem that I am having to confront myself as an MP is I don't think the Brexit deal that the Prime Minister's trying to push through is actually delivering on the referendum, and I think that's the fundamental...
Is there any deal that you could back that would take us out of the EU? Probably not.
Well, my view is you're either in or you're out, and I think what I had wanted to see was a proposal around coming out that was more of a clean break, had a proper strategy around our economy, around cost of living, and actually instead, I can understand why, but the Prime Minister really tried to get a compromise, something in the middle. And in the end, if I look at what my own local community is saying, Leavers don't think it really represents Leave because, of course, we're signed up to so many EU rules still. And then, of course, the Remainers think, well, what's the point? We might as well be sat round the table shaping the rules if we're having so many of them still for our country. And actually, they're both right, and that's why I'll be voting against the deal.
You talk about a clean break, but you don't mean no deal, surely?
Well, I think it was up to the Brexiteers and the Prime Minister to come up, if you like, with a different option. I've always been interested to look at what Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson have talked about. I haven't seen a detailed proposal from them, but in the end, actually what we're faced with as a country are three clear routes. Either We have the Prime Minister's deal, which she's putting before Parliament, or we can have this cleaner break, probably leave on WTO rules, get a free trade agreement, or, of course, you can keep the existing deal. What I'm saying is I actually think in the end, because Parliament's gridlocked, we don't have any other choice apart from to go back to people and find out what the compromise is on a route forward on Brexit that they want. And I happen to think, as somebody who represents a very young constituency with lots of younger voters, I think that's actually the right thing to do as well.
Let's talk about one of your favourite campaigns, apart from a second referendum, social mobility. What is it all about? What does it mean?
It's about saying that we should have a country where it doesn't matter where you're living in Britain or what the start is that you've had, actually you should be able to do as well as anyone else. And this sense of your background shouldn't hold you back in life.
So what's the practical implication for politics of that?
Well, what I've been campaigning on is something called the Social Mobility Pledge that I started after I left government. And I'm asking companies to take practical steps. I want them to get involved with schools, help on mentoring, doing careers advice, really giving young people a sense of the careers that are out there for them. I want them to open up their own doors so that young people can come in and get work experience or get an apprenticeship. And I'm asking them to do fair recruitment, whether it's name-blind recruitment or other things that can help. And actually the response from companies has been absolutely fantastic. A lot here in London, you know, whether it's companies on High Street that we all know, like Marks and Spencer's, John Lewis, Aviva, PwC, a lot of the law firms are signed up. But the key is there are lots of practical steps, and actually I'd like to see more British businesses helping young people get more opportunities. You
talked about your time in government. Let's talk about your time coming out of government. What do you remember of the conversations with Theresa May?
Well, it was difficult, of course, because I felt very passionately that I wanted to stay in education. This is the job, in a sense, that I'd always wanted. I would have got nowhere in my life without education. I went to my local comprehensive school, so it was a very personal thing for me, and I wanted to stay in and continue working there. Obviously, the Prime Minister wanted me to move to DWP, but for me, this issue of social mobility is so overwhelming. I think it lies at the heart of, in a way, the many reasons behind Brexit, and that's what I wanted to continue working on. And I've never been in politics for a job. That's, if you like, not how I define myself, so that's what I've left government to do.
One of your other jobs was transport. You were in charge when they started digging the Crossrail tunnels. This week has been an eventful week for the project. We know it's late. It's not going to be opened next Sunday as planned. The chairman, Sir Terry Morgan, has resigned this week. He's involved in a row with the mayor over when the mayor was told about the delay. Let's hear what the two of them have had to say.
I'm quite clear. It was only late in the day in August that I was told.
I told the mayor on the 26th of July.
What were you told at that 26th of July meeting?
I was given a number of different options.
Did you suggest to him when it might be delivered?
We put a number of scenarios together about different options in terms of the level of risk.
At no stage was I told by Crossrail Limited that there'd be a delay until next autumn.
What was the worst case scenario you put to the mayor?
It was autumn. Was the worst.
Can I be clear? Were you told at that 26th of July meeting that there was a risk of a possible delay to the opening in December?
There's been a number of occasions where we've been told there are concerns around the scheduling and the costs.
So that's a yes. You were told on the 26th of July by Terry Morgan that the opening on December the 9th might not happen.
No, what I'm saying is there are a number of options presented to us, not just in July, but over the last 2 years in relation to costs and in relation to scheduling.
He was left in no doubt that it could be as late as autumn.
Yeah, we left a hard copy in the room when we left the meeting.
So what do you make of that?
Well, it's all pretty shambolic, isn't it? And it does sound like the mayor was briefed back in the summer about the possibility that, or there sounds like a strong likelihood that it was going to be delayed, but now apparently didn't really do much about that.
Can you understand why the mayor might decide it's not in the public interest to let it be known that there's a possibility of a delay?
Well, I think millions of Londoners are counting on the Crossrail project coming through. Lots of businesses have made practical plans on the assumption of an opening of Crossrail on time. And of course, I think that the moment it was clear that there might be a delay, then the Mayor's office and Sadiq Khan needed to take a clear decision about how and when to communicate that. Now, I think just to simply wash your hands of it and say, well, I didn't know about it, is completely unacceptable. He might have taken a decision as you say, to think, well, this isn't the right thing to do, it's not definite, but in which case, just tell Londoners that. Say that he felt it was not appropriate until he knew for certain that's something he could do. But clearly what he's trying to do is, it sounds like he's wriggling off a hook. And instead, you know, I don't think Londoners are that interested, if you like, in the politics around this. They just want delivery of great transport and this new project, Crossrail, that everyone's been waiting for, well, for well over a decade.
Going back to the Prime Minister, you obviously weren't happy at leaving in those circumstances. Do you think she can survive? Would you like to see her replaced?
Well, what I'm interested in is making sure we get the right route forward on Brexit. I don't think we can get on to any of the other things in politics that I really care about, whether it's social mobility, whether it's housing, any of it.
Is she an obstacle to that?
Well, I think we'll see, won't we? So it's very clear to everyone in Parliament that as things stand today, there is no prospect of her deal getting through. Now, she is saying she's not thinking about a plan B, but I suspect come Tuesday night next week, she'll have to. And I think a lot of what then unfolds will be contingent on her response to that and whether she's got the capacity to take on board the reality of where we're at.
Justine Greening, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us this evening. Now to the extraordinary political scenes this week. Government defeats and impassioned debates have put the House of Commons right at the heart of political life, wrenching power and control away from Mrs May's government.
I call the Prime Minister.
It might be mission impossible, but that didn't stop Theresa May trying.
This argument has gone on long enough. It is corrosive to our politics, and life depends on compromise.
But fans of her deal were thin on the ground.
Theresa May's deal has emerged as Frankenstein's monster, an ugly beast that no one voted for or wanted.
The brutal truth is that the country is bitterly divided. And it will be bitterly divided if we leave under the terms that the government has negotiated.
Former London Mayor and ex-Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said the deal had brought Remainers and Leavers together. He didn't mean it kindly.
We are united. The whole Johnson family is united in the belief that this is, I'm afraid, a national humiliation.
It became quite clear to me that this deal is not politically or practically deliverable, that it will make us poorer and it would also risk the union.
Hackney's Diane Abbott questioned post-Brexit security cooperation with our nearest neighbours.
Government ministers have been trying to drum up support for Theresa May's deal by saying that the alternative is no deal, which would be disastrous for security. But Theresa May's deal would be almost as bad.
And all the while, talk of a second referendum is getting louder.
I cannot see how we are going to resolve this issue if we do not refer it back to the people to determine. So let us have that people's vote that we need.
To discuss all that and maybe even venture a prediction about what happens next, I'm joined by the Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton, Rupa Huck, for the Conservatives, the Romford MP, Andrew Rossendale, and for the Liberal Democrats, the former London mayoral candidate and former Richmond Park MP, Baroness Susan Kramer. Welcome, all of you. Mrs May's deal seems to have no friends at all. Can I just ask you quickly, any of you support it?
I think you've got three people that's united against.
The answer is no, and
it's
we all come from different positions.
Andrew Rossendale, is Brexit in danger of disappearing because of this?
No, not at all. The fact is that it's the law that on the 29th of March we leave the EU. We have passed the Withdrawal Act, and to change that would mean a government to be elected on a platform of backtracking on that policy. We mustn't forget that last year we had a general election and 85% of British voters voted for parties that were committed to seeing through the results of the last referendum. To dump that and somehow unravel it without a general election to get the British people to elect a government to pursue that would be completely undemocratic and go against all of our conventions.
Look, I mean, I think how can it be undemocratic to have more democracy? So, I mean, I would say that, yeah, we had a general election, but it wasn't a resounding vote of confidence in where this Prime Minister is taking us. She lost her majority.
But your party stood on the manifesto
time-limited
see it through.
negotiations. She got 8 weeks of that fanning around having an election, lost her majority. I agree with Chukwuemeka in your video there, that the only way out of this mess, it's united everyone against it. It's a duff deal, whichever way you look at it, whether you voted Leave or Remain. The chaotic way, 20 resignations.
Susan, you're a peer now. You're supposed to take a slightly more mature view of democracy. Does it worry you that a second referendum will betray an awful lot of voters?
I think the mature response is to go back to the people. This is a complete mess. The deals that are on offer fulfil none of the promises that were out there for Brexit, either the May version or the no-deal Brexit. Every one of them makes us poorer. That was never said at the time. And it is really important that people who now have... People are clever. They're able now to see many of the facts that none of us knew. You know, those are now on the table. People can see the options. And I say this is the time that we go back to the people and give the people a vote. And we have, as a party, been saying that for months and months as we watch this mess develop.
Andrew, how worried are you by the Dominic Grieve amendment, which effectively gives Parliament the final say if Theresa May can't get her deal through next week?
Well, I'm not completely sure that it does. It muddies the water, I agree. But in reality, any change to the existing position would mean that we would have to repeal or amend the Withdrawal Act and also the Act that enacts Article 50. So until those two pieces of legislation are changed, I know it's not going to please Susan and Rupert, but the truth is we are leaving on the 29th of March, and that is the commitment that my party and the Labour Party and 85% of people voted for in the general election. Now, we didn't win an outright majority, but parties committed to pursuing the result of the referendum got 85% of the vote. You cannot throw that in the dustbin and expect people to respect British democracy.
Does any of you... I think going to the people is not throwing anything in the dustbin. It is called respecting ordinary people.
Taking their
intelligence.
How many referendums do you want? A third one? A fourth one?
How is this taking back control that it's a blind Brexit? She's got a blank cheque to do what she wants.
But how many referendums are we going to have?
It's all fill in the blanks. I want a referendum where the facts are on the table. Had that been true the first time around, you wouldn't hear me arguing. But we didn't have them. None of us had them. They're on the table now, and people are in a position to be able to say, is this the life that I want? Because it's a long-term commitment
well, of course,
for them, for their children and their grandchildren.
The first referendum, the facts, Susan, were not on the table. The first referendum was in the 70s, when we were told it was a common market. Now, nobody then told the British people at that stage, hang on, common market, that's what we're telling you, but actually it's going to be a political...
I think we've moved on a long way since
so,
1970.
So let's enact the result of the last referendum before we have another one.
How would you defend a no-deal exit?
To be quite frank, there is no such thing as a no-deal Brexit. What it means, in reality, is there's no comprehensive deal which everything is linked together, which is what the Prime Minister has currently put forward. What I'd like to see is, very cleverly, the Swiss, over many years, have negotiated individual bilateral arrangements on things that are sensible. So we don't need one big overall deal. Actually, you can agree.
For a cornflake
you can agree sensible bilateral relations, so we can work together. That is actually what we should be now working towards, rather than this nonsense of a crash out. That's not going to happen. We need to be bold and confident that, as our country being such a huge economy in Europe, of course Europe will want to continue to trade and work with us.
Andrew, we are not Switzerland. Our economy isn't. Over 40 years, it has become completely enmeshed across Europe. As you say, this is like having an omelette and trying to extract an egg. And those are the complexities. The Swiss face nothing of that. And what would happen with a no-deal Brexit? You've got an immediate crisis along the borders. But long-term, you have no framework to trade with our major partner. It will take years to put together piecemeal trading deals which will be a shadow of what we have today.
We trade with Western Rail on WTO terms.
Rupert,
so what's wrong with the EU?
Do you think that Parliament does get more control if, under the Grieve Amendment, if Mrs May deal gets voted down?
There were three very significant defeats for the government on Monday that all sort of signalled the legislature taking more power over the executive. So the fact that the legal advice that we're allowed to see now, because it's unprecedented to have a government that's in contempt of Parliament. I mean, I think that's pretty serious stuff. And then the Grieve Amendment, that we have a chance to vote, to have a proper, meaningful vote at the end of all this. And I do think if you take any decision, you should be fully aware, fully armed with the facts. And what I was witching on about earlier, in Ireland, they had this referendum on abortion reform. It was 70-30 because the text of what you're getting was presented to you, whereas this one, we didn't know what we were doing. And people voted in good faith for stuff they're not going to get. £350 million a week for the NHS.
Do you all
so
agree
is this what people wanted?
that it's unlikely there's going to be a general election, that the DUP will not let the government fall?
We don't
despite
know.
Jeremy Corbyn's wishes.
I'm not Mystic Meg, but I mean the fact that, I mean, who knows what's going on in Theresa May's head? She's insistent that her deal is going to get through, but going around the country doing a tour and doing TV debate or agreeing to TV debates she didn't want to do in an election. We're ready if there is one, and of course any opposition would want a whole general election to get rid of the whole lot.
Susan, it is a mess, isn't it? I mean, there's no getting away from it.
It is a complete mess, and nobody is sure what is going to happen going forward. I do think, though, there is a growing momentum saying under these circumstances, the options need to go back to people because Parliament is torn. There is not going to be a majority for any single position. So saying this time we have to recognise that the people have the final word. This is their country. And when you're in a situation like this, you turn to the people.
Do you agree, Andrew, that if there is a majority for anything in Parliament, it is for a not crashing out, and there's possibly a majority for a second referendum?
Look, the way we work is this. We have general elections, OK? And parties are elected with a manifesto policy. OK, we can't just make up policies because happens to be a parliament full of people that voted Remain against the will of the British people, which was to leave. We have to be true to the democratic wishes of the British people. And if we're not, there's going to be an almighty collapse of confidence in our democracy, and I really think we need to consider the implications.
You worry about that, surely,
this.
Rupert?
I think it's a completely democratic thing to allow people, is this what you want? When you delete a file from a computer, it says, are you absolutely sure? When you buy a house, you have a survey. If it shows the thing is riddled with cracks, you have a right to pull out. And if people want it, fine. This thing that there'll be a third and a fourth, at least we'll know people were properly informed.
Where's the precedent for what you're saying? There's no precedent
one
for
final
having...
point. Can I ask Susan, what happens if there is a second referendum and the answer's the same?
Then we go with it, because people will have had the facts in front of them. And can I say...
I'm sorry, unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been great to talk to you about this. I'm sure it's going to be even more exciting in the next few days. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to my guests, Justin, Rupert, Andrew and Susan. I'll be back in the new year. Until then, thank you for watching and good night.